The ticket was paid in full. The seat was assigned the boarding pass scanned clean. And yet, the moment I settled into that window seat, I felt it. That quiet shift in the air when someone decides you don't quite fit the picture they had in their head. 3 sentences into this story, and you already know how it ends, but trust me, the way it unfolds still surprises me every time I replay it. I thought I was just flying home that night. Turns out I was walking straight into a lesson about power prejudice and what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person. I'd had one of those weeks that drains you down to the bone, the kind where your shoulders stay tense even when you're sitting still. I was flying out of a major East Coast airport first class, not because I wanted attention, but because after years of grinding, I'd learned that sometimes comfort isn't a luxury, it's survival. I'm not flashy. I don't dress loud. People usually clock me as some mid-level consultant, maybe an accountant, maybe a professor who grades papers on weekends. I kinda like that. It keeps the noise away. So I tucked my bag under the seat, exhaled, and thought finally 8 hours of quiet. That piece lasted about 90 seconds. A flight attendant stopped beside me, smile tight, voice polite in that rehearsed way that never quite reaches the eyes. She said there was a small issue with seating and asked if I'd be willing to move. I told her I'd just gotten settled, asked what the problem was. She glanced down at her tablet, then back at me and said a priority guest had arrived late and needed this seat. Not wanted. Needed. I remember tilting my head trying to process how someone else's lateness had suddenly become my responsibility. I told her I paid for the seat. I showed her my boarding pass. She nodded, like she already knew all that, like it didn't change anything. There was another seat up front. I pointed out an aisle seat just a few feet away. She shook her head and said that wouldn't work. Privacy concerns, preferences, company protocol. She said it the way people do when they expect you to stop asking questions. Then came the offer, a downgrade and a voucher, a few $100s to give up what I'd paid thousands for. Now, here's where the inner monologue kicks in. There's a moment when you feel that familiar burn, the one that says, "Here we go again." The assumptions, the subtle suggestion that you should be grateful just to be here. I kept my voice calm. I said no. I said I'd stay in my seat. That's when her tone shifted. Sweetness gone, replaced by something sharper. She warned me about being labeled uncooperative, about security, about consequences. Funny thing is, I've spent most of my career reading fine print contracts regulations that most people never look twice at. I knew exactly where the line was, and I also knew I hadn't crossed it. I wasn't being disruptive, I was just sitting. But the way she looked at me, you'd think I was causing a scene. She walked off toward the cockpit, and I watched her go, feeling that quiet certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't over. A few minutes later, the priority guest showed up. Young guy. Loud. Dressed head to toe in labels, phone already out, camera rolling like the world was his stage. He stopped in front of my seat and said, "You're in my spot." Didn't ask, didn't even check his pass, just declared it. I told him calmly that he might want to double-check that seat assignments are printed for a reason. He laughed and said he doesn't check passes, said he told the airline what he wanted, and that was that. The flight attendant came back this time with a supervisor and a couple of airport officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Suddenly, I'm the problem passenger. They tell me this is my last chance. I explain again that I paid for the seat, that moving me would violate their own policies. One of the officers actually hesitated, asked if I had a valid ticket. Before that could go anywhere, the supervisor cut in and said it was now a safety issue because I wasn't following crew instructions. That word safety gets thrown around a lot. Sometimes it's legitimate. Sometimes it's just a shield. I stood up then slowly, not because I was intimidated, but because I could feel the situation tilting toward something bigger. I said I'd deplane voluntarily, but I wanted it noted that I was being removed solely to accommodate another passenger's status. And I asked for my checked bag to be pulled. They didn't like that part, tried to brush it off, said they'd send it later. I reminded them quietly that planes don't take off with luggage that doesn't match a passenger. That changed the energy real fast. As I walked past the young guy, he laughed, made a comment about me flying economy. I leaned in just enough to say, "Enjoy the seat." It's going to be a long night. Off the plane, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I made a call. Then another. There are clauses buried deep in contracts, the kind no one thinks about until they matter. Compliance holds. Lease agreements. Ownership structures. By the time the aircraft started pushing back, those clauses were waking up. The engine spooled, then cut. Hard stop. Champagne spilled somewhere up front. I could hear the confusion even from the terminal. The captain came on with that strained voice pilots get when something is very wrong, but they're trying not to panic the cabin. An administrative issue, he said. Minutes later, law enforcement vehicles rolled onto the tarmac. The mood shifted from inconvenience to fear. Inside the terminal, a manager found me, sweat darkening his collar, asking me to please make it stop. He said I was costing the airline millions. I told him it stopped being about money the second his staff threatened me for sitting in my own seat. I laid it out simply. I wanted my seat back. I wanted the person sitting in it removed. And I wanted an explanation on record for why a false report had been filed against me. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then the marshals boarded the plane. They went straight to the front. No smiles. No small talk. They asked for the young man by name. He thought he was getting escorted to some VIP lounge. Instead, he was informed he was being removed for trespassing on a federally regulated aircraft. His ticket had been voided the moment the lease was pulled. The look on his face when that clicked. Yeah, that's one you don't forget. The flight attendant was asked to step off as well. Badge surrendered. No dramatic speech. Just silence and the weight of consequences settling in. When I walked back onto that plane, the cabin was quiet in a way that felt almost reverent. I sat back down in my seat, wiped off the mess left behind, and asked for water. Not to make a point, just to restore normalcy. The flight eventually took off. Smooth, uneventful. 8 hours later, I landed overseas and went straight to a boardroom. Apologies were offered. Perks dangled. Free flights for life. I told them they still didn't get it. This wasn't about comfort. It was about dignity. About rules applying evenly. I invoked oversight provisions, demanded policy changes, terminated a lucrative corporate partnership tied to that priority guest, and redirected a token voucher into a meaningful donation for passengers who don't have lawyers to stand up for them. The fallout was brutal. The influencer faced charges. His family's business took a hit. The airline rewrote its playbook. And me, a week later when I flew home, they tried to block off the entire cabin just for me. I told them to sell the seats. Upgrade families. I don't need isolation. I just need the seat I paid for. That's the part people argue about. Some say I went too far. Others say it was overdue. So I'll leave it to you. Was it justice or was it revenge? Was it about standing up to arrogance or did the punishment outweigh the offense? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you've ever been judged, underestimated, or pushed aside because someone thought you didn't matter, tell your story too. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't quiet because they're weak. Sometimes they're quiet because they know exactly when to speak.